In today's video, I'm getting out of my studio space for a little while and trying my hand at something that I haven't done in a long time. Urban sketching. Well, kind of. Hello to all you lovely and wonderful people. A big warm welcome to my channel. My name is Lynette and this is a space where we get creative together, making art, bullet journaling and even the occasional crafting session. Feeling motivated and inspired to do something different and blow some cobwebs away, I grabbed some art supplies, a sketchbook and Dave the dog and headed out for a very blustery and chilly walk along the beach. My initial intention was to sit at a bench and sketch on location, but I didn't quite anticipate just how cold and windy it was out here today. So I took a couple of snapshots which I'm going to use as a point of reference when I get back home in the warm. Hopefully as the weather improves further into the spring we get, I'll be able to sketch outside and not have to battle against the wind blowing everything about and my hands freezing up. So instead of sketching, we let Dave take in the beach and the sea for a little while. Which he really seemed to enjoy, eating the sand and running around catching his ball, but he was very cautious of the sea and I can't say I blame him. So we decided to head to the pub for a drink and defrost ourselves before heading home to begin sketching. I will be sketching in an A5 Pink Pig watercolour cold press sketchbook. The paper is 270 GSMs thick. And the paints that I'll be using today are from a Van Gogh Bright palette and Payne's Grey, Burnt Sienna and Buff Titanium from Daniel Smith's, which were already in my palette from a previous painting. The photo that I decided to sketch is the more close-up image of the tower which I took, mainly because you could see the details in the structure more and I quite like the angle of which I took the photo from. Once my decision had been made on what photo I was going to sketch from, I could pick out the colours of the photo and start mixing up my colour palette. I started off with mixing the blues for the sky, which was a cerulean blue with a little bit of Payne's Grey. Once I'd decided on my basic colour palette, I could start on the actual sketch itself. So the technique that I'll be doing today is paint first and then draw later. If you've been watching any of my videos previous to this one, then you'll know that usually I sketch everything out in pencil first, and I'm a little bit of a control freak in that way that I like everything structured and worked out in my head before I start committing paint to paper. So this is going to take me completely out of my comfort zone. It's good to mix things up and challenge yourself, and this technique will make me loosen up a little bit. Now, I have never attempted this way of doing things before, and I'll admit that I'm not confident on how this is going to turn out. How I see it though is it's a good opportunity to learn from, whatever the outcome may be. So the idea is to make your sketch about shapes first, rather than the lines or the contours. So with regards to inks and watercolour sketching, it means painting shapes of tone and colour first, and then adding ink lines on top of your painting. Like I said, I am no pro in this technique whatsoever, but I'm hoping that I might find some spontaneous results and help me to loosen up a little bit and teach me a different way of looking at things, so in shapes rather than outlines and contours. At the moment, it is feeling a little bit weird for me. I'm using the Buff Titanium as the base of the the stonework of the tower, and I'm finding it really tricky to not overthink the process too much and trying to stop myself from worrying too much about perspective before adding any of the contours or the lines. And I'm trying hard to remind myself that this is a sketch and I'm not attempting a masterpiece, so there shouldn't really be any pressure. It's a learning exercise that I'm hoping will end up with more playful and expressive results. So a little bit on the subject matter that we're sketching today. Along the beach in Ryde on the Isle of Wight there is a small tower which is actually a folly that was built around 1875 just above the beach. Originally it was part of the Appley Tower house estate, which sadly no longer exists, but luckily the local landmark still remains. The Gothic revival structure has a circular tower with battlements, a turret and an external staircase. And I thought this teeny tiny miniature castle would be really interesting to sketch. When I laid down the first wash of paint, I made the basic shape of the tower, the foliage and the sky, and the windows, and without waiting for any of the paint to dry so that they blend freely into each other where they touch, hopefully leading to some really interesting tones and blends. Remember, we're not going for 100% accuracy here. Then once I was happy with the initial shapes that were made, I go and have a brew and let it dry, and then I can see what areas need further work before I start adding any pen to paper. It was all looking a bit flat, so I used some burnt sienna to add some shading and colour and texture to the stonework. I was a little concerned at how orangey it was looking, but I can guarantee you it does dry a lot less vibrant. The greens that I have in my palette are very bright, so I used some burnt sienna to tone those down a little bit. And then I start building up the moss and the grassy area and the plants around the base of the tower. One thing I did find useful when doing this technique was squinting at the scene, and that helped me to see where the basic blocks of colour are. Again, I'm not worrying about being too precise, it's just blocking the colours in and then adding slightly darker shades of greens, wet and wet to add a bit more interest, and hopefully maybe indicate where a bit of shadow is. Using some Payne's grey, I start making some basic tree shapes. At the moment, I'm not too happy with how they look, and I'm hoping that I can rescue it later on. I'm hoping these trees don't make it look a bit unbalanced. Is that the right terminology? It just seems like now I've added those trees on the side where there is just the sky, it looks a bit unbalanced, but I'm hoping I can add a bit of point of interest into the sky later on to kind of make the whole composition a bit, well, more balanced. Using Payne's grey, I added where there's shadow and like the darkness of the windows to the tower. With being a bit uncertain with how this is all going, I let the paint dry, and then with a 02 black fine liner pen that is water resistant, I start sketching out all my line work. I think that's quite an important thing that I need to add, is make sure when you are using any form of ink that it is water resistant, because if you want to add layers of watercolour on top with regards to like shading or adding texture or anything, you don't want your ink to bleed. So yeah, please make sure your pen is water resistant. With the black pen, again, I'm trying to keep things reasonably loose, adding details but not sweating too much about adding too much level of accuracy. I'm trying to be quite expressionistic with this. So I'm just working around the picture, adding details of that sort of bay window bit, the battlements at the top, and then eventually the turret and the windows and the main structure of the building. I'm not worried about being entirely accurate as long as it kind of looks like what it's supposed to. But yeah, I'm just working on the basic shapes, and then once I've built those up, I can start adding all the little details that will make or break the picture. There's some real dark shadows underneath the arch of this window, which I might go over with a bit more Payne's grey later on, but I've added some dark lines to create those shadows now. And then I start to attempt this turret bit, which I keep putting off, and then you see me checking out of again. I'm feeling a little bit intimidated by the angles of the curves of the turret, especially towards the bottom, so I'll put it off a little bit longer and start working on the roof underneath the battlements. You may notice where I use the Payne's grey to make a reference to these sort of arch bits underneath the battlements. I didn't add enough, but that's okay. I'm just going to draw on top of them and then add the shading in anyway, as I will be going over this painting again to add extra texture and shadows anyway. At the moment, the stonework on this tower is looking rather flat and almost like sandy coloured, so I will be adding a lot more paintwork on top, and then hopefully it will start looking like it's supposed to. If there's any part of this picture that requires the most detail, it's the stonework. I feel like the stones and the roughness and the texture of the stonework is something that is quite important within this scene, so I'm going to be focusing a lot of my attention on that area. And also these windows, because they are right in the centre of the sketch, and so probably the first bit that your eyes are drawn to within the scene. Also, the windows that I'm currently working on are sort of diamond leaded, so they'll add a different texture and point of interest to the sketch. They're also very pretty and have a gothic shape, especially at the top two windows. So if you have a go at recreating this image yourself, that would be the two things that I would focus most on this sketch, is the windows and the texture of the stonework. Because this isn't my usual kind of video, I'd be really interested to know if you guys are enjoying this video and if you'd like me to do some other sketches from around the Isle of Wight. There are so many historical buildings and beautiful landscapes around this way, which obviously I can sketch still in my own time, but if you guys aren't interested in this, then I won't bother turning them into a video. But yeah, your input would be very valuable, so let me know what you think in the comments section below, because my aim is to create content that you guys enjoy watching, and without your input, I don't know if I'm reaching that goal or not. I definitely want to give this technique another go regardless. It's really making me have to think differently as to how I usually approach a piece of art. And I do enjoy the challenge of doing something new. I think giving yourself the challenge of doing something new and that's not comfortable can be very inspiring. As they say, variety is the spice of life, and it can get a bit tedious and boring if you're doing the same sort of thing over and over and over again. So it's time to finally tackle this turret bit that I've been putting off for as long as possible. It honestly got to the point where I started getting really stressed about doing it. So I took a break and had a cup of tea and had a little word with myself and reminded myself once again that it's a sketch and 100% accuracy isn't important. Once I took the break though, I did feel a lot more positive about tackling it, even though I did kind of mess it up and got a little bit cross with myself. The air around me did get a little bit blue for a minute or so. However, I think with a bit of shading here and there and a bit more paint, which I add later on, I do kind of end up saving it, I hope. Anyways, I continue to draw the rest of the inclines until I'm happy with the overall look of the tower. Now all my basic outlines for the tower are complete. I start sketching in the plants at the forefront of the picture and then adding texture to the moss at the bottom of the tower. Again, I'm not worried too much about accuracy as long as they do look somewhat like leaves. I add a lot more line work to the base of the plant so that it creates shadow, and the same for the mossy area at the bottom of the tower. I'm getting happier with the sketch as I go along, but definitely needs some more texture to the stonework and shading because it does look incredibly flat at the moment. So using Payne's grey and some burnt sienna, and also some burnt sienna with a mix of the greens that I've been using, because a lot of old stonework does have that green tint to it where there's moss and God knows what growing on the stonework. But yeah, I'm just going to go through now and add texture to all the stonework and shadow wherever it's currently missing. Honestly, this part was the best and the most enjoyable bit for me because you could start to see how everything was coming together, and adding the texture to the bricks definitely made a big difference. And for me personally, the bit where I thought actually I might pull this off and it's not a complete failure, but yeah. The trees needed a lot more work. Now, I know I didn't depict them accurately to what is in the photograph, but I wanted them to sort of tuck a bit more behind the tower, just because I think it'd look nicer. And then with my black fine liner, I go back in and add a bit of stonework, not completely over the whole of the tower, but just making reference to it here and there so that I'm not filling in the whole thing. I go over some of the pre-existing lines that I feel that need thickening up, that are areas that are casting shadow, and continue adding more and more stonework. The trick here is knowing when to stop, and that can be quite tricky to decide when enough is enough. With the stonework and all the shading that I want to add to the tower, the only thing now that's left for me to finish is the branches on this wintry tree. I do also add some splashes of blue paint to the sky and a green paint around the leaves to create the feeling of movement within the picture and just to give it a point of interest on the left hand side of the sketch. All in all, I'm very happy with how things have turned out, even though it's not exactly the way I wanted it to look. This was a really fun technique to try and something that I'm definitely going to have a go at again. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment in the section below. If you'd like to support the channel and my art, then please hit the subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, take care and goodbye.